Hey everyone, Matt from Soundrolling.com, and I'm here with Alan Lee Williams III, boom operator extraordinaire. And I'm looking forward to talking to him more about all sorts of things to do with boom operating and boom poles and boom handling. This is personally a very exciting talk for me just because getting a chance to speak to more boom operators is very rare unless you meet them in person, obviously. So first I'll say hi, Alan.
Hi, Matt.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. Just enjoying finally having a day off, which is great. So,
Fantastic. And I'll just say some, again, disclaimers type things. It's like we are live with about a minute delay, so you can always write text comments to that side, I think. Maybe that side. One of these sides, you can write text comments in about your views. And again, the video quality, once this becomes a video, will be slightly lagging out of sync and not the amazing high quality video that we all wish we had. But I'm trying to make this short, fast, informal, so enjoy all this content. And yeah, Alan, let's just kind of get started with how you got into boom operating.
huh. A long about story. Very weird. As a kid, I was in martial arts, and and this is going to be a bit of a story, but I got into martial arts, and of course my grandmother got a video camera, and of course me being inquisitive, I put two and two together, and all of a sudden started making the worst ninja movies you'd ever see in your life. And then after a while, from me just monopolizing time with the video camera, I was documenting just about everything. Went into high schools, performing arts high school, and started to do more and more with videos, sometimes even regarding class projects and everything. Then one of my teachers said, "Why don't you do something with this? Is this what you want to do?" I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Well, let me give you the number to a public access television station in a town." And I was 17 and technically too young to do anything there, even take classes, but they said they'll turn a blind eye because they could tell I was interested. Started taking the classes, ended up joining their staff and working in master control for a time before I turned 18 even. But in the meantime, I went to school, and then as soon as I was done there, I would go and volunteer my time. And one of the things that I did was I was saving up every cent I possibly could from working and spending it on gear. The problem is they teach you basic stuff in classes about video editing, but not about sound. So all my projects sounded really bad. And as time progressed, things got nonlinear. And I wanted to make a nonlinear editing system. And so that took me into the IT world. I got a job right out of high school as a video production, kind of the second command at a video production facility, where he was a big-time supporter of sound. He thought sound was just as important, if not more important, than the videos that we were producing for corporate. And you know, we did everything from weddings to corporate events. And so I was there for a while, and then in the early, like around 2000, I think I left that company and just kind of was still doing martial arts at that point. Went full-time in the martial art world for a while, and then all the time I was constantly doing my own projects, including video. I was DJing parties, all kinds of things. Well, I also went into the IT world because once you start learning about computers to build a nonlinear editing system, it's kind of logical. In the meantime, I was constantly caring more about my videos and that I was doing, and still volunteering for stuff at the station, even though I was doing other bigger, better things. A friend of mine that I worked at the station with back in 1994, one of the first guys I met there, his name was Aaron Siegel. And he was also in IT, but one of the things he would do is use his vacation time to work and do sound on short movies and shorts and just pretty much anything he possibly could. And over the course of time, he started getting bigger and better things and started to need a boom operator. I didn't know anything about this. This is probably in 2001. And I started booming and doing random stuff for him. Whenever he'd get a job, he never wanted to turn him down. So he would sometimes hand me little mixing jobs or something like that, and I would, you know, just work and do them. I ended up, you know, leaving martial arts I was in IT for a while full time. Left that to become martial arts instructor for a while underneath the masters at my school. Then ended up going in back into. I ended up meeting my wife. She was a member of a photography company. I joined as a photographer and made it into management there, where I was also a team mentor and trainer. And then it had some issues with management and ended up leaving that company, looking for a job. This is about 7 years ago, something like that. And he said, well, my boom operator, who's been with me on all my shows, is just gone into the production department. I'm looking for someone else full time. So I said, why don't I do that? And I've always enjoyed it. I've always loved production. So I figured it was the logical step. And little did I know, over the course of time, as I was progressing, and doing more and more things, as I was learning more, I started learning that pretty much everything in my past came to some sort of being on set. The martial arts training taught me not only just, when I used to teach weapons and bow staffs and stuff like that, a lot of that's the same kind of stuff. I'll use the same kind of training, but modify that for boom handling. Customer service straight up from IT, as opposed to, along with the technical stuff. Photography, I can look at a camera and they say I'm on a 35 mil, and I look at it and I know what the frame rate. I know not the frame rate. I know where the frame is, so I can drop a boom right on the frame line. So it's kind of funny, a roundabout way took me here, but it's every single one of the skills I've acquired throughout the years has brought me to be pretty successful, if I might say, at keeping myself busy as a boom operator.
It's fantastic. The
weird
skills, yeah, amazing. And for the people not aware, I'll place a link below for the IMDb and all of that kind of jazz. But second unit on Fast and Furious 7, The Walking Dead for a number of episodes, lots of
a lot of that Splinter units I filled in for people on Principal Unit. It's funny, I don't even really do a whole lot with the IMDb anymore. That thing is so outdated. But I've done days on a lot of stuff, and so. But if you have a question about pretty much anything that shoots in Atlanta, most likely, if I don't work on it, I could tell you a story or something about it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking kind of more towards those kind of martial arts techniques for boom operating. Could you give us one of those? I'm trying to picture the kind of.
Well, if you can imagine that when you do bow staff training, for example, a lot of it is two-handed and you're grabbing one end of a bow staff. Sometimes you'll swing and swing it to grab the other side but a lot of it is the way you slide your hand. There's a pushing and pulling method you use. The same thing in swordplay, where you have to push and pull at the same time if you do anything where the pole is extended. A lot of that you would do from here or more from around here. You don't really do a whole lot from overhead. But I was able to take a lot of that, and a lot of it's balance also, and how you shift your weight as the pole moves. And so a lot of that was taking it from here to here, and then modifying, my actions and the way I was handling the pole and balance accordingly. So just kind of had to figure out a technique that worked for me.
Fantastic. And what type of poles do you have? Because you do have a selection behind you, but I'm wondering. What one is kind of your? Do you have ones for different uses apart from the length, obviously?
I do. I'm straight up ambient. I love ambient products. To me they make their poles are a little heavier, but they snap exactly where you want to. I guess you could say more like a bow staff. And there are other brands I'm not going to name that as soon as you extend them out, they turn into a rainbow, especially by the time you put some heavier microphones on there. I don't like that. I like them to be, very, very strong, very snappy, and ambient seems to be, in my opinion, the best. You can, I do a straight cable through the inside, and of course, I have a total of 5 poles. Now, there's a couple of duplicate sizes. Most of the stuff I use now are they're new QS poles. As a matter of fact, behind me, in the front here, on the short one, there's a custom-made pole it's a shorty. It's a 7-foot one at Ambient make for me, and it goes up to about 7 feet. The next one there is the QS Mini, and then the tall one is the QS. In the back, I have another QS pole inside of a 120 extension, so that goes to about 23 feet. And then I have a duplicate of the QSM, which is a QP480. But those are my poles there, and they each have their own uses. The shorty I'll use because it collapses down to about this big. It serves great purposes if we're in a small door or something, at a convenience store, and I have to go someplace and stick one hand up. There you go. Most of the time I end up using the 12-footer, which is 11 foot 7 inches or something, but by the time you add the flow through and the quick release and stuff, it's about 12. And then after that, I probably do about 80% of the stuff I boom is with that pole. And then I'll go to the QS if I need up to 18 feet, and very seldomly, probably less than 1% of 1%. No, probably about half of 1% of the time, I'll have to pull out the 23-footer. But there you go. That's a day in the life of pole selection. Most of the time, I default to the 12-footer.
Fantastic. And it's interesting. There's always the kind of debate of the kind of outside wrapping to the inside, like internally coiled to the outsides. And are you having a curly cable inside? Are you having a straight cable?
Right.
Are you having right angles on the end?
Well, there is a big debate about that, and a lot of it, if you have an internally coiled cable, it is typically noisier. You can't do any fast movements, or you're going to hear the cable rolling around on the inside. But a lot of people like them for its quickness and convenience. If you don't have to sling the pole or fling it around real quick, then it's probably going to be fine for you. After that, it's, do you like to have a right angle on the end? Do you want to have a straight cable on the end? Does your plug, does XLR connect on the side or the bottom of the pole? At that point, you have to look at those kind of wires. Me, I like straight cabling, which is straight through it. I tried years ago to do a wrap on the outside, but to me, it was just in so many of the situations we have to go into around lights. You know, sometimes I'll have to extend the pole and bring it back in. I understand there's clamps and stuff like that you can use to keep the cable against the pole. I just can't get a good system going on it, so not my preference. But I like the straight cable. Straight cable, I can fling that thing all over the place and you won't hear it, especially inside of these ambients.
Fantastic, fantastic. And when it comes to just you being on set and working with the mixer, are you, what's it like in terms of recommending types of microphones and things? Will you generally, I assume you've worked for lots of different mixers if you've done lots of kind of daily shows, so how are you kind of adapting to different microphones?
Well, it's funny. A lot of the time, I end up working with the guy that I mentioned that I met at the public access TV station over 20 years ago, Aaron Siegel. He likes to work just like I do, so we work constantly. He'll book back-to-back-to-back shows. Sometimes we'll wrap at 4 a.m. on a Saturday and load up a box fan and a box truck, and we'll go and load it into the camera truck wherever that happens to be, and then start Monday morning at 7 a.m. on a new show. But he and I both love to work, and we just go back to back. There have been times when we did Fast and Furious 7, the stunt unit, for example, we were doing a whole bunch of pilots at the time. We would wrap at midnight or something like that on a Friday night, Saturday morning. We would load up the box truck and be on set at 7 a.m. on Fast and Furious. Or if we had a later start time or something, we would do that. And then Sunday night, we would tear down all the gear, put it back in a box truck, take it to set, and offload the gear at 2 in the morning. And then we would go in there at 6 a.m. and start our day. Exhausted, but we still did it. But a lot of the time I do end up working with Aaron because he and I both see eye to eye on liking to work. And I've reached out, and I've worked with other mixers too. Most of the time when I work with them is between shows, because most of the times when you find a mixer, they have a team that they like to use. And they'll only call you to day play if they need somebody to fill in for a week or overlap. And most of the time, Siegel will jump on a show and work, so he keeps me busy, and that's great. So, but yeah, I've worked with other mixers in town too, and a lot of the different mixers have their own preference of microphone. Here in Atlanta, most of the time people are using the Sennheiser MKH50 indoors, and outdoors there's anything from the Blue Sheps 5U to the CS3. Me personally, my favorite outdoor mic that I use a whole lot with Aaron is the 82, the Neumann 82, and so I use that a whole lot. It's a longer mic; it's almost 400 millimeters long, but it's heavy inside of the Zeppelin. But to me, I like the fact that I can reject out a lot of sound, and I know the pattern really well, so I can play it. But as for indoor microphones, almost exclusively, people in Atlanta use MKH50s. They'll use Sheps, the CMC 641s. There's a few people starting to get into the DPA microphones, like the 4018 with the different preamps. The C is the one that's designed so the whole microphone is this little tiny thing like that. And you can get different patterns. Some of them are modular like the Sheps, and you'll do some great plants with those. But as a general rule, booming, it's mostly, here in Atlanta at least, MKH50 and CMC 641s.
Fantastic. And are you finding that you're doing a lot of, just like a mixer would always be looking out, I guess, for the new kind of tech in terms of mixing consoles? Do you find you're always kind of reading up on the new specs of different types of microphones and even offering those as suggestions?
Well, I'll tell you. Oh yeah, from working with other people, I play a lot with a lot of different mics, and I'll say, "Oh, we need to try this," or "We need to get this." I will say that my mixer is very set in his ways, and he likes certain microphones, and he doesn't want anything else for it. So when I tried to say, can I get a DPA and we'll use it in some circumstances indoors? No, let's use the 50. Okay, outdoors, can we use this other microphone? No, use the 82. Very seldom have I been able to convince him to let me do something else, because most of the time we'll make it work just wonderfully with the regular standard microphones. I know some people that just use one microphone indoors and outdoors. They'll still use a 416, or even there's a mixer I know of that just uses an MKH50 indoors and outdoors and almost never deviates. But I mean, there's a lot of different microphone selections, and as a matter of fact, this year I've been doing a lot of training classes and reaching out to vendors and saying, one of the ones I did, I think it was in August, I believe it was a boom mic class where I talked about the different patterns of boom microphones, and then I reached out to vendors galore and had them send a whole bunch of microphones. So we had 3 different listening stations where you could test side by side the Sennheisers, the Sheps, the DPAs, you know, and then we had another listening station that was the indoor, the hypercardioid and supercardioid mics. Then we had another listening station that was for short shotguns and another one for long shotguns. And you know, you try to do things that people probably wouldn't have available if they went into a store and listened to them. Like I'll get actors and come and voice actors, and I'll have them read, so that way they're consistent tone qualities of their voices, so you can really hear the difference in the microphones. So hearing microphones is something that we've had a lot of chance to do. As a matter of fact, since I've been teaching the classes, I'm constantly told, here, try this, test this, can you do a class around this? I'm like, I'm not going to do a class around it, but I'll certainly involve you, and that kind of thing. So I've heard a lot of microphones, especially recently, including some things that, and I have some opportunities, which I won't go into here, to listen to some stuff that's not even released yet, which is cool.
Fantastic. And it's always really interesting when when people are kind of trying to assess choosing a new microphone, for instance. They'll first go to the tech specs, and they'll compare it to the one they probably have, which is the 416 or something like that as kind of their standard, or whatever they want to kind of reflect, whether it's the MKH50 and things. How do you find? I mean, it's really good that you're keeping it kind of real and consistent in terms of actors, but are you finding that those kind of tests are a fair reflection on the kind of outside circumstances day to day?
By outside circumstances, I guess, do you mean?
Sorry. Like in the field. Sorry, like when you're testing a microphone inside when it's one by one by one. Do you feel people are getting? Do you feel there's enough difference in certain types of microphones for them not to, for instance, choose all the same one?
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yes, there's a lot to different. Every microphone sounds different. Every pattern sounds different. As a matter of fact, Glenn True, who owns True Audio, one of the things he loves to say is, we've given names to the patterns of microphones, but technically they don't really mean anything, because you could have a hypercardioid that sounds like a supercardioid that sounds like a cardioid, and you really give it a term so people can broadly understand, but it's really when you hear the microphone you can see how it's really going to be useful to you. There are some actors that if I had an infinite selection of microphones in my hand and my mixer let me trade up on it, there are some actors that will sound better on certain microphones, and I would choose those microphones according to, you know, what I like to hear and how I think that they should sound. Also, the room that they're in. Is it a room with just nothing but hard surfaces, hard floors, hard walls, glass walls, open ceiling that opens up to a sound stage with a 40-foot roof, and let's just say that their soundproofing is less than you would wish it was, versus a room that is nicely carpeted and everything is very soft. Or, you know, there's some places, some rooms that will shoot in that they'll put almost sound dampening on it, and you'll never know it. And so it sounds almost like closed in like a booth. It sounds very quiet in there. Most of the time, for quickness, they don't have a chance to do that in the set construction. But you know, there's different microphones you choose for different things based on where you are also. So a lot of the times, at the pace that you run at on TV shows, at least, you usually will say, this microphone does a spectacular job 99.9% of the time. I'm going to go with that, and if I need to deviate from it, then I will. But usually there's that one microphone, and there's some microphones that will sound different to you after a while. There's mixers I've talked to that love the way that the 50 sounds, and they say, you know what, I'm going to try the 641 Chefs. And they'll say, wow, this is a great microphone. Why have I been using the Sennheiser 50? And then they go back and they use the CMC for a while. And then they say, you know, for this, I think I might try the 50. And then they go back and say, wow, the 50 just sounds wonderful. And they go back and forth. And, you know, if I had infinite microphones at my fingertips, I'd probably do something similar. I'd just mix it up all the time based on the room, acoustics, you know, when you're miking children, sometimes they can sound harsher on certain microphones. Is it a noisy room? Are you having a problem with your location? Do you need more rejection if you're doing outdoor stuff? Just, you know, microphone selection plays a big part of it, but usually mixers have a range of 2 or 3 microphones they want you to pull from most of the time.
Yeah, and I guess that's also coming back to kind of the point of having consistency throughout, obviously, a whole film, because then obviously dialogue editors, I assume, would prefer, even if I suppose the sound is better from the person, I guess then the background noise, and again, all the other factors come into play that might make it slightly more, not necessarily problematic, but maybe just a bit more work, just making sure that they have enough stuff going on.
Well, post guys, if they have to replace any dialogue, a lot of those guys want to know what microphones you're using, so that way they can try to more closely match your sound or their sound to your sound. If you don't tell them what microphones you're using, they're going to have to just guess as to what sounds good. But most of the time, mixers that I work with will say, I'm using these microphones, and they even, you know, now because of the electronic age, you have apps to do your sound reports. You can go in, list the microphones you have, and say, this scene is this boomed with this. And you're right, exactly right, regarding maintaining consistency amongst your tracks throughout the season. That's also very critical. Actors, as a general rule, won't change a whole lot the way they sound from scene to scene or room to room. But you know, sometimes they'll sound bassier depending on the room. Sometimes they'll sound more hollow. There's, you know, if I wanted to play, I would play and do that. But a lot of the times, you do want to choose microphones for their consistency and maintain that consistency throughout the show or the season.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in terms of, like one of the hot topics again is cleaning boom poles. What should I do if it's dusty? Let's start.
Well, first of all, what kind of boom pole do you have? What's it made of? Carbon fiber is what ambient boom poles are made of. Yeah. You know, there are others that are made of graphite, sometimes even aluminum, and each one of those has their own tricks. As a general rule, I would say you can talk to the manufacturers, go on their website and see what they recommend that you clean them with. If you're talking about ambient boom poles, Pledge wipes are great. They have done me very well. They used to sell the orange ones, the orange Pledge wipes. They don't do that a whole lot anymore. So there's the lemon ones too, but that can leave a tacky residue on your pole that you really don't want. 409 is great to clean it with, and you would basically use a nice rag or an old shirt or something, and you put that on there. Wipe the pole down. You can put it on a small rag, and when you take apart, just unscrew it, and you can thread it straight through the inside of it. Ambients are self-cleaning to a certain degree. They have a couple of little pieces of soft side Velcro on them that as you extend the pole and retract the pole, it will kind of clean itself a little bit. So replacing, in that circumstance, you'll clean and replace the Velcro. If you're here in the States, you just contact Reading Audio and say, hey, I need some more of the ambient Velcro, and they'll send you some. If you're international, you can probably get it from a place, and maybe even ambient directly if you're near Germany. But I know that another good thing to use on an ambient pole, because it's carbon fiber, is orange oil. You can get some orange oil, and after you put the 409 on that, let it dry, and then wipe it down with orange oil. It adds a nice citrusy smell to it, and it makes it smooth, very smooth. As for your cables, if you periodically go through, and if you don't replace your cables, but what you can do is take a couple of those cleansing wipes in your hands, the ones that antibacterial, sometimes even Lysol wipes are used, but you coil it to your hand using one of those wipes in your hand. When you're done with that, let it dry, and then get some Armor All. put that on a rag, do the same thing, and that restores the coat of the outside of your cable, which is on all my poles it's Canary cable. So Canary star quad. I don't use the thin star quad because sometimes if you're horizontal, you have to retract the pole in a small little tight spot. Sometimes they'll jam up. So I use the full size star quad.
Fantastic. Oh, it's really interesting. Always, I have carbon fiber as well, but I'm with Panamic at the moment.
Yes.
And another thing is just the moisture aspect. Especially when things are cold. I mean, and now is the season when things get wet and cold, and we're
Right.
usually outside and things. In terms of what we should be doing in terms of storing our boom poles, especially after a long day shoot when they've been wet, should we be putting them by a radiator? Should we be leaving them completely undone and extended, or completely undone and closed?
Well, if it gets rained on, you don't want to tighten it. You want to leave it loose, because as it starts to dry out, if you tighten it, it can sometimes seize. Doesn't happen with ambience or Panamic because they're made better, but there are some poles, and that's probably not even fair to say. There are some poles that just by their design they lock up more. Doesn't run into that. Don't run into that as much on Panamic and ambience, because those are the two big carbon fiber giants in the industry. I like Panamic stuff. You just can't internally cable it.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the times, a lot of the moves I have to do, going in and out and quickly being extended 20 feet, I don't have time to curl the thing over and over again. I want to be able to move fast, which is one of the reasons I like that. Other brands of poles, though, will lock if you tighten it even just a little bit, especially because what will happen over the course of time is you go from indoors to outdoors or outdoors to indoors. If it goes from cool to hot or hot to cool, it can seize, especially if it's outdoors, it's very, very hot, you over tighten it and then store it in a cool area, that thing is going to be really locked down because the temperature is going to, it's going to shrink a little bit, and that could damage the pole. You don't want to do that. If it's raining outdoors and then you tighten it, as it starts to evaporate, it can seize around the pole too. Don't want to do that. That's a big kicker right there. If it's rainy or if it's moist at all, leave it unlocked overnight. If you want to extend it, I've done that before. I've extended the poles when I've been really nervous about them. Just that way it'll air dry out on the inside of the trailer. But know your brand of boom pole. Do a couple searches on JW Sound or just on the manufacturer's websites and in their forums and see. Just exactly what they recommend in those circumstances. I know with ambient, you don't have to worry about it. Just leave it. Just don't tighten it. No worries.
Fantastic. And what are you doing for the handle as well? Because mine, after a while, once it's been like repeatedly drenched on, let's say, several days, it just really starts to smell damp. It's just got that weird smell. Do you do anything to kind of wash the handles in a way?
Well, that's one of those things that you use the Lysol wipes for if you want to, just to get any grunge that's on there. And then, of course, the better stuff to use on its 409. I've used the Lysol wipes on it just as a period. Thing is, with carbon fiber, you want to be careful with what you put on it because it's a temperamental stuff and you can very easily damage it. Some of the stuff you even use can dissolve it if you use the wrong stuff on there. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. But 409 is a great cleaner that you can use on that. And of course, top it off with the orange oil, and it gives it it just restores it. I don't know how it does it. It just does a great job. It allows it to slide very smoothly in your hand. So you don't have to worry about any of that. But as a general rule, if it gets wet, just to wipe it down. You could use a soft towel for that if you want to. The main thing is don't, try to get as much of that stuff off as you can and do maintenance on it as soon as you're not going to be in that environment anymore. If you're in any kind of a sandy environment, you can gunge the inside of that pole up real quickly. Panamic, since it doesn't open up, you probably don't have that to do that as much as you would on a straight cable or even maybe a internally coiled cable, because if you don't open up the pole and have a hole where your cable comes in and out, then it's not open as much. Like on a straight cable, you have this port at the bottom where your cable goes straight through the inside of the pole. It can grunge up pretty easily if you let your cable dangle on the ground and it happens to go through mud or something like that. You want to make sure that cable is very well cleaned up, because a lot of the times people will say, I'm going to clean the outside of my pole, neglect the inside of it, and all of a sudden they keep extending out the pole and they keep seeing more and more dirt on the cable. don't want to have to run into that. But those are just a few of the differences between internally coiled cable or externally wrapped cable versus the internal straight cable. Just all in the tricks of what you learn regarding that pull and maintaining the sheen, maintaining the material itself.
Fantastic. Well, I want to move on to obviously things like Fast and Furious, because if you're on the action unit, what sort of stuff are you covering?
Well, of course, it's in post-production. Every bit of the stuff I did on it was before Paul Walker died. Afterwards, I was too busy. But we had a very, very busy stunt unit. Of course, being that it's Fast and Furious, there's a lot of cars. There's a lot of vehicles of all sorts. I'm not going to go into it in any more detail than that. But there's a lot. But you'll see a lot of it in the trailer if you watch the trailer online. And there are a lot of crashes. They love to just and one of the things I really appreciate is real stunts. So many times now they default to CGI stunts and it doesn't look right. And CGI is better used, in my opinion, for fixing little details, replacing a background. Leave the stunt and actors that or their stunt doubles. Let the stunt doubles do the real stunt, and then remove their wires, change their clothes, that kind of stuff. But let the stunt be the stunt. That's the really awesome stuff. And plus, it's a lot of fun to participate. There was a setup where we crashed. We did a test crash. They had two identical vehicles. One of them was picture, one of them was not, and they crashed it through something. And then they said, "Okay, now we have to repair that wall." And so we were standing around at night, in the middle of the night, goofing off for about 7-8 hours while they rebuilt the wall for the real one to crash through. But they had them identical vehicles in order to make sure that they would properly match weight-wise, so that when they crashed in, they saw where the vehicle went. And that was the part of the test they did. And then, of course, when we did it on the day, it was awesome because everything had been tested and they had done everything. But you know, you'll have big, huge, spectacular crashes, a lot of explosions, that kind of stuff. Like all the other Fast and Furious movies, it's not going to visually disappoint. Visually, there's a lot of stuff to look at.
Fantastic. And are you finding that kind of work? I guess people are kind of imagining that as slightly easier in terms of boom operating. Is there much dialogue content?
Absolutely. Those are the things you look forward to, because so many times you'll be on these shows that you'll be doing, you know, between 6 and 8 pages on television, or sometimes even more. The last show I did, they would sometimes have us just doing long days. They would schedule long days where we did up to 12 pages and scenes all over the place. So when you get an easy day like that, you look forward to it. You look forward to the days when you could practically leave a boom inside of your caddy, connect the thing up, point it at something, and say, okay, sound speeds. And this is after 6-8 hours, and really, in all honesty, anybody could point the microphone someplace. A lot of it is just getting the resume to the point where you get the call to do it. But I tell you, it is one of those things where when you do a stunt unit, if you're doing gunshots, you have to take extra precautions. Like one of the things you'll do is take some sort of an omnidirectional microphone. You'll use an SM58, you'll use an RE50 something, and you'll connect it up via cable back to the mixer. So that way, and you'll run them a couple of them out maybe. If you're in a warehouse, you run it out maybe a couple different sides of it. And the reason why you do that is because you want to catch the concussion. You want to catch the way that it echoes and sends sounds way down into the valley and back or whatever, and how that gunshot really sounds. You're going to, since those are pressure-operated microphones versus the pressure gradient microphones that we're usually used to, the ones that are cardioid pattern microphones, and those, you have they're a lot less sensitive to damage through high sound pressure levels. So they'll do a lot better job of picking those up. So the mixture will dial in on a good level, and that way when you hear like this, you know, just mowing down something, or the crash, you'll have a great sound that comes through those. A lot of the times, the sound departments will do that. They'll run out at least one of those. So you normally wouldn't do that on episodic television or in features, but when you do something with big, loud noises and you want to make sure you capture them well, because most of the time you'll take a microphone, a boom, and you turn it away. You put pads on it, but you'll make sure you cue it away from the loud noises. if you don't use a different microphone for the gunshots itself. But there's different challenges that you have of the mixer, of course, has to set those levels on the fly, or they do a sound test and you have to set it and say, okay, well, that's going to be good. But you want to make sure that still, especially on those kind of days, you can't be lazy and say, well, I have my microphone, I'm just going to point it at the stuff. You can't be that easy, because those shows at those levels expect more from you. Got to give me your tracks.
Fantastic, yeah. It's really interesting. And the you've done other things like Quarantine 2 and things where it's kind of, I guess, the more kind of documentary type feel. From I only saw kind of Rec, which Quarantine was based on, so I'm kind of guessing what Quarantine 2 was kind of like. But
they try to do that more of a feature, of people that it's supposed to take place simultaneously to Quarantine. At the beginning of the movie, they're on an an airplane, and they're kind of looking at internet video of the place, the apartment building, for example, in Quarantine, and they're saying, oh yeah, this is going on in LA. It's a good thing we're getting out of LA. But you know, it happens simultaneously, and the biggest challenge we had on that show was the fact that we were shooting in Griffin, Georgia, in a warehouse that was not soundproofed or anything. The warehouse you see, they built in it, but it was 100 degrees every single day. And it was hot. Then we'd go to the upper levels, and it got even hotter. If you happen to ever watch Quarantine 2, there's even a thermal camera that they brought out at a couple of different points. They were trying to keep they would do things where the operator was so hot operating the camera in that, because it would get up to 110 degrees over there, especially by the time you turn on lights. The operator with the thermal camera was sitting in, he would sit there in an air conditioning tube and let it blast him. But as soon as he would leave that and record for 2 or 3 minutes, he was burning again. So if you watch the thermal camera, they didn't change the temperature on that when they did the release of the movie. So sometimes it says 70, and then it cuts away, cuts back, and you'll see it's at 92. It cuts away, it comes back, it's at 98, and then the most likely they would say cut, because it was so hot. It was going back and forth between very air conditioned and very, very hot. Now, of course, if you weren't an operator, you didn't have that luxury. You were standing in the heat the whole time and sweating and burning up. But the actors, and they love to put the actors in those circumstances too, where of course they're doing stunts, and the stunt people were doing stunts, and because it involves height to it, we were up near the ceiling, and it was so hot up there. But that was what, 4 years ago when that movie came out, 3 or 4 years ago, and that was probably the biggest challenge. That and surprisingly, shooting on the airplane wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because between takes they had a big huge fan on the front of near the cockpit and in the very back, and they just blew air from the back to the front. So as soon as we said cut, the place turned into a wind tunnel, and it would go down to like 40 degrees, and we're like, oh, this is wonderful. And they say, pictures up, and we're like, no, don't do that. And as soon as they kill the air, it starts to melt us again. As soon as we moved into the warehouse, it got very, very hot.
Yeah, and how did the microphones hold up with the kind of humidity of it all?
No problem. We were, let's see, I think we were indoors. I can't recall if we were using the Sennheiser 50s, or if, because of the nature of, there was a lot of things that were menaces to us, we might have used a different microphone for that. It might have even been an Octava, a modified Octava at the time, which Octava is by no means the same quality as a 50, but I think that at the time we chose it because if it took any damage from all the different gunshots, because they would sometimes have dialogue and then gunshots, then dialogue, and if those things got damaged, so what? But it also, you could also put an elbow on it, so I could get it up in little bitty spaces like this, and that was good. So I think we used it on that. I can't remember us using anything else, because that was an entire movie that was done indoors. And there was a couple of shots of it that were shot at the outside part of the LAX airport, but we didn't do those. It was like one glimpse of a girl getting out of the cab and going in. Everything else, I think, was us. And that was, humidity isn't really an issue with Sennheisers. It's not really an issue with DPA. As a matter of fact, as long as you take the proper precautions, it's not really an issue with sheps either, even though it's a lot more likely to happen with sheps just because of the nature of it, of the design of a sheps. Now, the big thing you want to make sure of if you're dealing with any kind of environment that is wet is your connectors. If you're concerned about it, if you tape over the connectors, for example, coming out of the microphone into the boom, you just add a little piece of tape around there, it's going to keep a lot of that moisture out. A lot of it will also come through into the capsule as well, but you can add a different windscreen to that if you're concerned about it. You can add more of a ball windscreen if you want it, not just a little teardrop windscreen, and that cuts out some of that moisture too. Not a whole lot, but you want to make sure you store it properly. Another thing you can do is people have a tendency of taking their microphones indoors where it's warm and then taking them right outside. And so as soon as that happens, you can run into moisture as it cools, as it goes cold again. One thing you can do is store it in the temperatures you're going to be shooting in. So store it in your trailer, and if it doesn't have heating, then that's fine, because the microphones will be cool, and they'll sit there nice and cool, and then when you go to use them, they'll be cool and won't have to rapidly adjust, and therefore it won't make all those little moisture pops that you might be used to hearing if you have an issue with moisture.
Brilliant. I should remind, it's just people watching at the moment, they kind of zone out and forget it's live, and that they can ask questions if they want. Use the comment section somewhere around this video, and I'll kind of feed those in. You can participate. This is why this is live, remember. And I'll let you get a drink, a well-deserved drink, which I should have got to start with as well. When you're doing double booms, have you done double booms before with people? Have you worked with other boom operators? And how are you dicing up scenes?
Well, you have, of course, utilities. Shows now, this day and age, they're doing more and more with multiple cameras. And back in the day, it used to be you'd have one camera, you'd have a boom operator. If it was a wide shot, great. You put the boom out there and you get perspective sound. You get the camera perspective. If it was a big room and it was a big with 5 feet of headroom, you point a microphone out there, you get it as close as you can, it's going to sound like a big room. Now they'll do a wide and they'll do a tight also. So a lot of the times you'll have to resort to the wireless microphones, but since you specifically mentioned second booming, that comes into play too, because sometimes the wides they'll choose a higher camera angle and look more down, or even with the tops of their heads, so the headroom is pretty reduced. And in that case, then you have depth that you have to play. And another circumstance would be if someone's on one side of a door and the camera's looking this way, they walk through a door and then the camera quickly reveals the room. You can't have a boom operator on one side of that door with the camera and then pull back into that room with them without losing them around the side there. So in that case, you'd have a second boom. What I do whenever I have to do a second boom, I will make sure I give the easier of the two shots to the utility. Sound utilities have so much stuff to do. Back in the day, they mainly did cables and a few, like paperwork and stuff. It has gotten a lot more difficult for a sound utility. So I'm more active than many boom operators. I'll intentionally take things off of the utility to make sure that our team has things done as quickly as possible, because you don't want to be caught, especially in episodic television. It's just not something you want to do, and they'll run fast pace now. A lot of these shows, especially when they don't plan them correctly, they'll run really fast. So I'll tell if I look at a scene and after I watch the blocking, I say there's an opportunity for a second boom here, I'll go ahead and tell the utility to prep the wireless boom stuff. I always have multiple microphones on the boom caddy, so all they have to do is grab their transmitter and power supply, throw it on their belt, run over there, grab one of my booms, plug it up, and they're good to go. But usually, as a general rule, I will give them the easier of the two jobs. As a matter of fact, it was about 2 weeks ago we had a utility, and he's fairly new to the industry. He's been to some of my training classes. He's come and shadowed us in the field, and we decided, since he was catching on really quickly, we decided that me and the mixer could fill in the slack, but we wanted to give him some experience when he was filling in for our utility. And there was a couple of circumstances where we said, would you like to second boom this? And one of those happened to be a circumstance where there were two cameras set up. They had a wall opened up on one of the sets. One of the girls was deep in the back. Another girl was walking all over this room that was just all over the place. The easier of the two shots for him to boom would have been the girl that was about 20 feet away. Of course, what does that mean, though? It means you pulling out the jumbo boom pole, extending the thing out there, and holding it for about a 3-minute long take, and that can, and you know, keep about maybe 2 feet of headroom. It was a pretty quiet stage, but I tell you, it's not an easy thing to do for it to work properly. In the meantime, the more difficult of the two shots was me extended with a 14-foot pole, following the girl that was playing a hyper girl that was all over this entire set. She was walking this way. She turned. She'd look down. She'd look up. She'd go over, put this thing in a chair. All this kind of activity she was doing, and I was following her. But the easier the two shots was still not easy. And because he was green, I said, this is not easy. You know, holding the pole out there for a long take, it's not easy. And he ended up saying, yeah, why don't we play the wire? Why don't we play the wire on this? Which is fine. It was kind of borderline anyway, 2 feet of headroom. But that was kind of one of those isolated circumstances where they're both difficult. Most of the time, though, it's like, play this much headroom on this person right here. Watch out for this light right here, and you'll want to play it from this angle and make sure that you stand here to avoid the lights. And the big thing I try to avoid is calling in a utility last minute. That's something that usually that happens because there's a change last minute with the camera department. They'll say, oh, why don't we punch in? Great, we'll punch in. Boom, now let's roll. And we have two cameras on two different people in the courtroom scene or something. And they'll say, okay, well, we're doing coverage here and coverage here. I can't swing the thing 20 feet, so why don't we have a second boom? And that's when I'll say, be ready, because anything can happen, and usually does.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting just hearing more about sound utilities, and I'm trying to find some more to actually get some chats to. But how has your perception?
I recommend some great ones.
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. But what is your perception of how their roles have increased?
Well, it's funny. There's what we always say is that the third basically runs the department. As crazy as it may sound, they run the department, but they have no power. As weird as it is to say, most of the time, the way that the sound teams that I've worked on, we try to do everything we possibly can so that the mixer has nothing to do except sit there in their chair and listen. To me, that is when a sound mixer is most valuable, when they're at their console and listening, because just the nature of the way things happen, someone's going to turn on a light and you're never going to hear the ballast, which is that close to set, because they set that light. And you know, I'll stay on top of that. I'll say, okay, I just spotted that light. I need you to run can you run the ballast around the corner or something, so that way it's farther away from set. In the meantime, I've missed it. They've set up something else, and there's a light that's ringing over there. And I'll throw the boom out there, and I'm like, what is that? And the mixer's like, oh, it's a ringing ballast. And I'm like, man, he's on it because his ears are tuned in to that. That is his main job. So, but a sound utility, in addition to second booming and coming out there, they'll do paperwork. They will do wireless microphone. They'll put on the wireless microphones. They're maintaining the inventory, and there's a lot of batteries and media management that they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to run this, or it used to be photocopies, and run it to the media manager and bring back the card, give it to the mixer, that kind of thing. But I mean, utilities, they're very valuable. If you don't have a utility and you have to split the task, very quickly you'll learn that someone else is the person, usually the boom operator, driving themselves crazy, throwing down mats and silencing footsteps and footfalls by putting on hush heels or something like that. And that's one of those things where I don't do it anymore. If there's a show that doesn't have a utility, I shake my head at it, with exception of very easy second unit days. As a matter of fact, the past 2 days I've been on Complications, TV show, and we've had second unit days. One of those days was a person free driving in a car, wired up the car, hit record, and there's no room for anybody to be. So that's when we sit over there and go to craft services and get hot liquid and sit there and chat and drink, and then when they finally come back half an hour later, you push stop and then say, okay, camera's going out again, pictures up, hit record, it goes out. But aside from that, I was planting microphones in the car. The only other scene that we had was a person that just, it was one person with dialogue. Aside from that, it was a person running around, and there was a chase through the woods the day before, and 2 lines of dialogue we recorded all day. Easy stuff. Those are easy days. But you know, a lot of the time, especially like if people are like, for example, out in the woods, if the actors did not stop, if they were moving on the fly during that dialogue, one thing that I would have the utility do if there was not a greens or set, probably more of a set decorator person, is if we, as soon as we lose their feed and the cameras are tight enough to not see the feed, I would say let's rake out and make a path clearing the leaves out for the actors. That way we don't hear all the rustling of leaves as people are running up the woods. And whether the show has the time to do that or not is another question, but most of the time if you plan on it and anticipate it, you can get that kind of thing done. You'll have this, you'll talk to your set deck friend and say, can you have that thing ready? Because as soon as we punch in, I'll say, can we go? And if you have a second one, I'll gladly join you. And a utility would be that other person that would do it most often, because a lot of the times boom operators have a lot of stuff on them, and if we are holding a pole, we don't have a caddy like that to throw it in, then that takes one of our hands, and trying to operate, you know, a rake is kind of difficult, but you can do it. Most of the time, though, a utility is, you know, they're repairing a cable, they're cleaning something, they're standing behind the mixer, and they're like, oh, I'm going to quickly put some museum putty on that to silence the way that thing rattles, because the set sags at a certain point when people are walking and there's something that rattles, or separating something. A good utility is constantly listening during a take, and that's the biggest thing that I can tell you a utility should do is, if you listen, one of the things I say all the time in the classes I teach is you must listen. You're in a listening department. It's like a camera operator. If you don't look through the viewfinder, you're going to miss everything. You have to listen when you're in the sound world, because if you don't listen, and I don't just mean listening to people chattering, I mean you have to listen to the background noises, which should be gone. You should shut all those down. If something turns on that wasn't there and hasn't been there, a utility's job is to jump up and quietly go and find that sound and shut that down and work on that. If there is, if suddenly it sounds noisier, like outdoors, and it wasn't there on all the previous takes, utilities should automatically, before a mixer or a boom operator tells them to, go up and find what door was left open. Or if somebody opened up a door to put or a window to put a cable through and didn't close the window, get a Fernie pad, close it on there, so that way it's quiet again. Those are what a good sound utility will do, is silence all the sounds. They'll make sure that everything is as quiet as possible, and they're proactive. That's a big thing I always tell my utility friends is be proactive and anticipate. Sound people in general, you have to listen. But those are the big things I usually tell sound utilities, is be proactive and anticipate the needs of the scene, the boom operator, and the utility and the mixer.
It definitely seems like they need to kind of be the third AD of the whole department, which is really interesting. But when I suppose another role is also in terms of playback, and when you're doing things like stomp, it must be pretty hard to get rid of footsteps and things like that.
When we did, well, a lot of the time, like when we did Stomp Yard 2, you don't have to work a lot. You don't have to deal a lot with dialogue through that, because most of the time, because it's a dance movie, most of the time they like to see the dancers. So it's head to toe on them, and you know they're going to be making noises there. Most of the time, you're not going to do anything regarding their feed there, because they're dancing. You expect it. What I'm referring more to, silencing footsteps, are in, they love to put women in high heel shoes, because they say, oh, it straightens their legs, and the high heels adds whatever, and they stand there, long legs is sexier on camera. Let's do that, and it's better, looks better. Problem is, it sounds noisier. So we have to silence footsteps there. Sometimes we'll put runners, or we'll put down a whole bunch of mats for the background people. A lot of the times they're constantly building these sets so quickly, they don't have time to sweep them up properly. So if you say, can you go, as soon as you don't see their feet, if you say, can we lose their shoes on that, they don't want to do that. They'll also say, oh, it changes their height. So you have to put down mats. You have to quiet them with heel caps and foot foam and the other tools like that. But as a general rule, those are also done by utility, and a boom operator will help with that.
We're having a question just come in, which is it's kind of more about just generally mixing, actually, which is just that it's coming into camera left and right and about stereo tracks kind of being dead. I guess on the movies that you're doing, you're just time coding, or are you sending like a wireless link to camera?
You don't want to send what we refer to as a courtesy track to camera. We used to do that, but the problem that you'll run into is whenever you hop to a camera, cameras now are using all kinds of gizmos and gadgets that use frequencies in the air just like we do. They'll broadcast on HD channels. They have the Prestons are remote operated. You have all these different things that use frequencies in the air, and you gotta manage all those frequencies as well. Part of also utility talents that they do. But what you don't want to get into the habit of doing is transmitting something as a general rule to camera and for them to track it. The reason why is post will be lazy, and they'll use that audio you just hop to their camera. They'll use that for things like dailies. And if there's any hiss or there's any or it takes a hit or something like that, then the first thing post will do is they'll say, "Hey, sound mixer, your tracks don't sound good. I'm hearing wireless hits." I'm like, "No, it's perfect. Are you sure you're listening to the CF card?" And they're like, "No, I'm listening to the track." "No, I don't think you are. I think you're listening to the hop." And so we don't do that anymore because they'll get lazy. There's even been shows that in a pinch they will use that and take that into editing, and we don't want that to happen at all. So as soon as we found out that one of our shows did that, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, they did that just because they were behind schedule. We didn't want that to happen. We said, nope, they're gone. We're not doing them anymore. Very, very seldomly, and it's usually in only like a infomercial type thing if we're filling in doing something like that we'll do a courtesy track like that, and that's mainly because it's in a more they're needing it for Video Village, or they want to have it to play back from the camera to see. Most of the time on big sets, they're not going to do that. They'll play it back through something that they've recorded, and they'll just hit record on the camera, and they're only caring about camera. If you do infomercials or commercials or something, they want to hear the sound on the camera at the same time. But another problem you run into is an audio delay, or not. I'm sorry, I take that back. A video delay. Our audio will be a few frames in set because our audio is never delayed, but the processing the picture has to go through will delay that. So if a producer listens to that, they'll say, "This is out of sync. Why is the audio out of sync?" It's not really the audio is out of sync. It's the camera that's out of sync. Now I can delay the sound, but you don't want to have to get into that. You don't want to have to play that game. It's just too much. You have enough stuff going on as it is on set to have to deal with that. Don't give a courtesy track if you don't have to. If it's a requirement for the job, try to talk them out of it because their finished product could get lazily delivered. And if post wants it, just try to talk your way out of it. You don't want to have to do that.
Very, very good advice. I think this is it's a really good topic, and I kind of want to open up a whole different can of worms, but I'm just going to save that for definitely getting you back for another chat. Okay. So I just want to thank you for your time. The hours have flown by, which is fantastic. I want to thank everyone else for watching as well. I'm going to say goodbye and then talk to you off air, but I'll just leave you with the kind of final words for the people watching and on your kind of I don't want to put you in a spot with saying tips on boom operating, but just your final words on just some general advice.
As a boom operator, it's funny. People always say you're the guy with the pole. Well, yes, I hold a pole with a microphone, but that's a very small part of what we do if we do our job correctly. The big thing that we do is we make it quiet to hear the sound. We have to run the set. We have to manage the set because if we don't manage that set, we're the only person on that set that cares about sound. You have a sound mixer and a utility offset, but you are the front line of defense for your soundtrack there on set, and you need to make sure you stay on top of it. If someone puts down a cup and it's noisy because they put it down on a line, you need to make sure you get a coaster under that and watch for that. You need to make sure that they're wheeling something down through, if they're wheeling a tray or something through the set, you need to make sure that thing is quiet, that your utility has put WD-40 on there or silenced it somehow. If there's a tray on that that's rattling around, you need to call it in and make sure that they get that thing quiet. Make sure that no one, that if you hear any background talking, You call it out to the first AD so they can address it. Don't sacrifice for anything less than what we deserve, which is a controlled environment for us to record our tracks in. The thing y'all always need to think about as a boom operator is what is controllable and what is not controllable. I should say this is in general in sound. If it's something that can be controlled, you make sure it's controlled, especially if it's on set. If it's something that can't be controlled, like airplanes, obviously, then you can still do some things by making sure that you are on a good first relationship with the first AD, and you can make sure that if the first AD is near you, you can tell them, well, if I run into an issue with it, I'm not going to stop obviously or talk out loud, but I'll give the first AD, a sharp look, and they'll look back at me, and I'll just do this number. I'll say, and they'll say, let's hold for a second. Work out your relationships with people on set because those are very critical. There's 4 people that are always on set that need to be really tight with one another. The camera operator, the first AC, the dolly grip, and the boom operator. And most of the time, because we are sound, they automatically have rapport with each other because they're all working for the picture goal. So it's by using your personal, your outgoing, your ability to be respectful and play right with the other departments that are going to allow you, because if you're not nice to a first AC, they're going to say, I need some room here to focus. If you're not nice to a dolly grip, they're going to say, sorry, you can't be there. You get on a good relationship with you, say, hey, you mind if I borrow a little bit of your office space there? The dolly group will say, yeah, come on in here. If you're right there, you should be fine. How about right over here? This will work better for me. Yeah, I can do that. No worries. But you want to make sure that you are a people person, that you're outgoing, very respectful to the team of filmmakers that you're working with there on set. And that's probably the best thing I can tell you to do right there is make sure that the set is run with the goal of making it quiet so that you can record your tracks.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's a brilliant round-off. I just want to again remind people that if you joined in late, this will be made available as a video, and more chats will just be coming all the time as long as I can stay awake and all that kind of thing. So you can subscribe and like and share.
This is sweet, Matt.
And do all that jazz. So, so I just want to again, I'll just leave you, Alan, to say goodbye, and I'll say goodbye as well.
Take care. Thanks for watching.